This is another podcast from Alpha Business Media, and today we're plunging into a country that presents, well, a fascinating, almost bewildering set of contradictions, Nepal. Think
Yeah.
about it. You've got this nation where vibrant tourism is making an incredible comeback, yet at the same time, you see this widespread, really heart-wrenching daily exodus of young people. You have democratic processes, sure, but underneath there's this deep, pervasive public mistrust of the entire political class. It's a paradox, isn't it? It really begs a deeper look. So, we're diving into your sources today to unpack what's being called Nepal's triple crisis, essentially a critical set of challenges revolving around jobs, basic prices, and crucially, justice. Our mission here is to understand how the political forces there are responding to, or maybe even subtly shaping, these demands as they head into a new electoral cycle.
Exactly. And today, we're asking that fundamental question, the one that really cuts to the heart of democracy. Is Nepal's political class truly listening? Are they actually responding to genuine public needs? Or are they getting better at mastering the art of political technology? These sophisticated methods designed to influence public preferences, influence actions, sometimes while, well, maintaining the illusion of free choice. This deep dive should help you, the listener, start to discern the difference.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our sources reveal a pretty startling statistic. A staggering 68% of Nepalis believe the country is headed in the wrong direction. And when you ask why, the main reasons given are corruption and bad governance. This isn't just, general grumbling. It seems to boil down to three core interconnected issues. These define that triple crisis we're exploring.
Right. Imagine just for a moment you're a young Nepali, maybe full of aspirations, your biggest hurdle. Often it's just getting started. This isn't some abstract economic concept. It's a lived reality for millions, and it's the first leg of this triple crisis, the jobless generation. The scale of unemployment in Nepal is, well, it's genuinely staggering. The overall rate hit 12.6% in 2022-23. But for young people, say 15 to 24, the situation is much worse. Their unemployment rate soared to 22.7%, maybe stabilizing slightly to 20.82% in 2024, but still incredibly high. But the really shocking reality, the thing that truly illustrates this crisis, is the human exodus. Around 1,700 young Nepalese leave the country every single day looking for work abroad. Over the last 3 decades, that's nearly 6.8 million people who've received permits for foreign employment. That's a profound demographic shift.
Wow, 1,700 a day. So it's not just the scarcity of jobs then, is it? There sounds like there's also this fundamental mismatch between the education people get and what the market actually needs.
Exactly.
I saw an ILO report from 2021 mention that over 60% of Nepalese youth are either underemployed or, stuck in jobs that just don't match their skills. And we're not just talking basic labor here. Even highly qualified specialists like doctors and engineers are choosing to leave. That's a huge brain drain, surely.
Oh, absolutely. That phenomenon, what you rightly call brain drain, it reflects deep systemic failures in economic policy. Nepal's economy, well, it remains heavily dependent on low productivity agriculture. It's struggled to diversify into higher value sectors. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this pervasive unemployment is deeply linked to economic inequality. You've got wealth concentrated in the hands of a small elite.
Right, dominating sectors like banking and real estate.
Precisely. And that leaves very limited space for young entrepreneurs, or even just average graduates, to find stable, well-paying jobs. Plus, government policies often seem to favor large corporations, while crucial things like public education, vocational training, they're consistently underfunded. This limits opportunities, especially for underprivileged youth. So in that kind of system, migration, despite all the risks and costs, often becomes, well, the only viable path to financial stability for so many.
Okay, but it's not just about finding work, is it? Even if you have a job, the cost of simply surviving, that can be crushing. And that leads us straight into the second pillar of this crisis, the price of survival. This is where those official numbers often feel completely disconnected from daily life.
That's precisely the paradox. You see the central bank reporting a seemingly low official inflation rate, what was it, 2.77% in mid-May 2025? But citizens are facing a totally different reality, rapidly rising prices for basic stuff.
Like what kind of things?
Well, for example, mutton jumped from Rs 1,000 to Rs 1,400 per kilogram. Eggs, a staple, right? They soared from Rs 15 to Rs 25 each. Even apples are nearly Rs 400 per kilogram. This huge gap between official figures and what people are actually paying, it's a major source of frustration, understandably so.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a family already struggling, an egg jumping from 15 to 25 rupees isn't just a small fluctuation. That's a significant bite out of an already tight daily budget, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And experts seem to attribute this paradox to what they call a collapse of aggregate demand. Is that right? caused by that mass youth migration and falling investment.
That's the argument, yes. It's not that things are becoming more affordable for people. It's more that there's simply less purchasing power, less overall demand within the country.
So this highlights a crucial distinction for you, the listener. A low inflation rate, the rate of increase in prices, isn't the same as a low price level, the actual cost of goods.
Exactly. Prices can be really high, but still have a low rate of increase. But they're still unaffordable for many.
Right. Still unaffordable.
And this raises an important question about how we measure these things. The Consumer Price Index, the CPI, its methodology has been criticized. It averages costs across a whole range of goods and services, and it might not accurately reflect the real shopping basket, so to speak, of the most vulnerable low-income households.
So the official numbers might paint a picture that just doesn't match the harsh financial reality for the people struggling the most.
That's a real concern, yes.
And the human cost here must be immense. Stagnant incomes, rising costs, families are forced to borrow, foregoing essential foods like fruit.
Yes, making impossible choices, really, between putting basic food on the table and maybe paying for their children's education. It's heartbreaking.
And on top of all that, Nepal is particularly vulnerable to imported inflation from India, from global price shocks, making things even more volatile.
It adds another layer of unpredictability for ordinary citizens, definitely.
Okay, and that brings us to what might be the deepest wound, the one that kind of undermines everything else. The trust deficit, corruption, and the long wait for justice.
The figures here, well, they speak volumes. A staggering 84% of Nepalis consider government corruption a major problem. And in the 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index, Nepal ranked 107th globally. That's a low score of 34, signaling it as one of the most corrupt countries.
Wow. Where is this corruption most felt?
Reports mention bribery being pervasive in public services, taxation, government contracting, import-export, kind of across the board where citizens interact with the state or where big money changes hands.
And it's not just the corruption itself, is it? It's this pervasive issue of impunity, people getting away with things.
Precisely. Look at the transitional justice process, the TRC, the CIEDP, meant to address abuses from the Civil War. It's largely stalled.
Stalled how?
Critics point to a worrying lack of transparency, and there are real concerns that legislative amendments might end up granting amnesty for serious human rights violations.
Which denies victims justice.
Exactly. It completely denies victims justice. And this widespread failure to hold people accountable, it just devastates public faith in the state's fundamental institutions.
Yeah, I can see that.
And if we broaden that definition of justice beyond just corruption and war abuses, you've got persistent societal issues, deep-seated caste discrimination, especially against Dalits. Then there's violence against women, child marriage, forced evictions of marginalized communities.
All continuing despite laws against them.
Yes, all persisting despite legal prohibitions.
Yeah.
It creates this multi-layered social justice crisis that constantly fuels public anger and distrust. It really erodes the social contract.
So you can really start to see how these three crises, jobs, prices, justice, they don't exist in isolation at all. They're deeply interconnected, aren't they? Forming this kind of vicious circle.
Absolutely. A vicious circle is the perfect way to put it. You have constant political instability, frequent changes in government coalitions.
Which prevents the long-term economic reforms needed to create jobs.
Right. That lack of stability and opportunity then directly fuels the youth exodus we talked about.
Okay. And that mass migration, all those economically active people leaving, that reduces the domestic market.
Yes, leading to that collapse of aggregate demand. And that collapse, as we discussed, artificially suppresses the official inflation rate.
But doesn't actually lower the high cost of living for essentials, creating that weird paradox.
Exactly, the low inflation, high cost of living paradox. Simultaneously, this unstable political environment allows corruption and impunity to flourish because accountability mechanisms are weak. Political energy goes into power struggles, not governance.
And that corruption and lack of fairness further undermine public trust, leading to apathy, disillusionment.
Which in turn makes the political system more vulnerable to populist manipulation and just perpetuates the whole cycle of instability. It's a truly complex web. You can see how one problem just feeds the next.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now let's shift focus a bit. How do the political parties actually approach this triple crisis? How do they package and, well, sell solutions? This is where the political market comes in. First up, we have what you might call the old guard strategy, big promises and familiar faces. You hear this everywhere, don't you? It's sort of the same old tune.
Indeed. The established parties have certainly resorted to making ambitious, almost you could say fantastical, job creation promises. For instance, the CPN-UML, They pledged 500,000 jobs annually. The Nepali Congress promised 250,000. The CPN Maoist Center, 200,000.
Those are huge numbers, especially given the weak economy you described.
Exactly. Huge numbers. And it's crucial to see these promises in context.
Mm.
Nepal's weak economy, yes, but also a long history of unfulfilled commitments. It's classic populist rhetoric, really. These parties also use broad, attractive statements on social justice. Things like the Maoist Center's mission for social justice, good governance, and prosperity. Or the Nepali Congress vowing to expand Social Security from cradle to grave. They know these things resonate emotionally.
But there's that critical trust gap here, isn't there? Decades of political infighting, frequent government changes, a long trail of broken promises. Voters must be deeply skeptical.
Oh, incredibly skeptical. Their grandiose promises are often met with cynicism. They're widely seen as self-serving calculations just to hold on to power, not genuine plans for the future.
Yeah, it's hard to believe the same old tune when it's been played and failed so many times before. Okay, now in stark contrast, let's talk about the rise of the New Guard specifically, the Rastriya Swatantra Party's anti-corruption crusade. They really stormed onto the scene, didn't they?
They absolutely did. The RSP's emergence in the 2022 elections, becoming the fourth largest party, was a direct consequence of this profound public dissatisfaction with the established political order. Now, their ideology, it includes things like constitutional socialism, participatory democracy, economic liberalism, but their central defining message is a relentless fight against corruption.
It's more than just a policy point for them.
Much more. It's their core identity. It's epitomized by their leader, Rabi Lamachain, and his vow to, quote, cleanse dirty politics.
And what's interesting is how they contrast their approach with the old guard's vagueness. The RSP doesn't just promise good governance, right? They offer concrete, tangible anti-corruption mechanisms.
That's a key difference.
Like pushing for a Whistleblower Protection Act, advocating for a special anti-corruption police force within the CIA, and, importantly, taking a firm stance against any statute of limitations for corruption cases. They even propose abolishing the Constitutional Council, which handles key political appointments. That kind of specificity, it lends them a degree of credibility, maybe? Because it sounds like they've actually thought through the how.
It certainly makes their promises seem more concrete, yes. And this approach brings us to a crucial battle playing out. The battle of narratives, people versus elite. Populism, as a political strategy, consciously pits the virtuous people against a supposedly corrupt elite. And this narrative is highly effective, especially in places with high inequality and low trust in institutions, which, well, perfectly describes Nepal right now.
Right, it taps into that deep sense of betrayal. And the RSP's success seems like a textbook example of this narrative in action. Their anti-corruption crusade isn't just policy. It's framed as this moral battle against an entrenched, self-serving political establishment. That must resonate incredibly deeply with a population that feels let down by traditional parties. It's presented not just as politics, but as a kind of existential struggle, ordinary citizens versus what they see as a kleptocratic ruling class. It's a powerful emotional appeal.
Very powerful. And in response, the established parties, they try to counter this. They label the RSP as inexperienced, maybe childish, trying to delegitimize them. They also try to borrow populist language themselves, making their own grand economic promises, as we saw. But that tactic often falls flat because of their long track record. Just sounds like noise to many voters.
So the RSP made a really strategic shift, didn't they? Instead of trying to, say, outpromise the old parties on complex economic issues where promises are easily tested and maybe refuted by numbers, they focused their entire brand on one powerful, emotionally charged topic: corruption.
From a strategic standpoint, yes, quite brilliant.
Why brilliant?
Well, the brilliance lies in the fact that fighting corruption is fundamentally a moral position. It's inherently harder to refute with economic data than, say, a job creation target. It skillfully reframes the election as a choice between clean and dirty politics. And to make that abstract moral stance feel concrete, their specific legislative proposals like the Whistleblower Act serve as a kind of proof of sincerity.
Making their rhetoric more persuasive than just vague promises.
Exactly. More persuasive than their rivals' vague platitudes. The RSP effectively uses this idea of justice as its primary political technology. They cleverly sidestep a direct battle on complex economic promises, which they might lose, for a more effective war fought on the plane of political morality.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's explore the specific tools being used to understand and influence the Nepalese electorate. We're moving from what is said to how it's delivered. This is the modern toolkit political technologies in Nepal. First, there's this art of listening to the echo, measuring public sentiment. How do political parties even figure out what people truly want or what they'll respond to?
Well, modern campaigns rely heavily on electoral research. Tools like mass surveys, focus groups, they're crucial for identifying voter concerns, testing out messages, and developing strategies. For example, detailed public opinion polling data in Nepal, like those findings from Sharecast Initiative Nepal we mentioned earlier, they give a deep understanding of public discontent.
Like that 68% figure believing the country's going the wrong way.
Precisely. And knowing that this discontent is even higher among the educated and wealthy, that's exactly the kind of insight political strategists use to tailor their messages. RSP's sharp focus on corruption, as we discussed, likely not accidental. It was probably a very data-driven decision based on identifying corruption as a major, widespread public grievance.
Okay, data-driven messaging. Next, we move to the digital battlefield. Social media as a new political arena. This has completely changed the game everywhere, hasn't it? Nepal included.
Oh, absolutely. Social media is now central to Nepali politics. You've got 13.5 million users. That's nearly half the population. Platforms like Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, they're not just an extra tool anymore. They are primary channels for spreading information, advertising, mobilizing voters. It's where a huge chunk of the public gets its news and forms opinions.
And the spending on these platforms is pretty significant, I gather.
Yes. In the 2022 election, over $165,000 was spent just on political advertising on Facebook.
And what's really eye-opening is that the average cost per candidate's ad post, about $164, was actually more than the average monthly income per capita in Nepal.
That statistic really highlights something important.
Yeah, it shows how a seemingly democratic digital campaign can quickly become a very expensive monetized operation. It creates new barriers for those without significant financial backing.
Definitely. But this digitalization, it also has a significant dark side, as you might expect. Social media inherently creates echo chambers.
Right, amplifying bias, deepening division.
Exactly. And they're fertile ground for weaponized information propaganda, fake news, distorted narratives, things designed to manipulate beliefs and undermine democracy. Using emotionally charged appeals, targeting anger and fear, that's a key tactic we see employed by many different actors.
Has there been any attempt to regulate this?
The Electoral Commission has made efforts, yes.
Mhm.
They try to regulate the space and combat disinformation, but the task is enormous. It's like a constant game of whack-a-mole, really.
So this brings us to what seems like a fundamental paradox of social media in Nepal. On one hand, it empowers grassroots movements. It lets new forces like the RSP bypass traditional, maybe biased media. That seems like a democratizing force.
It can be, yes.
But on the other hand, it requires significant financial investment in advertising and data analysis. This creates a sort of new digital elite where money becomes a key factor again.
That's the tension.
And moreover, the very nature of social media algorithms, they favor emotionally charged, divisive content, makes these platforms ideal tools for manipulative political technologies.
Absolutely. So you have this incredibly powerful tool that can amplify the voice of the people.
But it can also be used very effectively to shape that very voice. It's a real double-edged sword that citizens and you, the listener, need to be aware of.
It certainly is.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's maybe reiterate the main points. Nepal's triple crisis, this pervasive lack of jobs, the very real struggle with high prices for basic necessities, and that profound deficit of justice, along with the public's widespread discontent. These are undeniably real. The voice of public frustration is loud and clear.
It is. And if we connect this to the bigger political picture, the response to this voice is what we might call hybrid. The emergence of new parties like the RSP. That's a direct and genuine consequence of the old guard's failures. It's a clear signal the electorate demands change. However, all political players, both the established ones and the emerging ones, are increasingly reliant on these sophisticated tools of modern political technology to navigate this complex, often turbulent landscape.
Right. So here's maybe the core insight for you, the listener. People's voice and political technology aren't really separate concepts anymore, are they? They seem inextricably linked.
I think that's right. Public issues provide the raw material, you could say, the emotional fuel for political campaigns.
And political technology provides the engine, the steering mechanism,
Yeah.
to transform that fuel into votes.
Well put. And perhaps the final provocative thought for you to consider is this. The future of Nepal's democracy really hinges on your ability, the citizens' ability, to distinguish genuine responses from those that are essentially technologically engineered echoes. The challenge for political leaders, and critically for you as a citizen, is to demand that promises are more than just sophisticated strategies cooked up to win power.
Because otherwise.
Otherwise, Nepal risks falling into this perpetual cycle of populist hopes, followed by inevitable disappointment, which just further erodes trust in its democratic institutions. It's a powerful thought to consider as you navigate all the information coming your way.